All right, so we saw when we were looking at the attendee list that there were some folks that were actually from cannabis businesses, which we thought was super interesting. And we were wondering if it's because folks at cannabis businesses are curious about how to get access to banking or know if banking is possible, or even maybe what do you do and how do you find access to a financial institution. But since most of our audience is financial institutions, we thought we'd sort of flip it and try to give you an idea of what it looks like as a financial institution to onboard a CRB, to look at them, to evaluate them. And hopefully that'll also give a little insight to cannabis businesses so that you know what's going on the other side of the desk. Because I know it's very easy to assume that a financial institution just doesn't want to do this, or they're taking a lot of time because they don't want to do this. But hopefully you've seen throughout these past 2 hours that there's a lot that they need to do. This is a really heavy lift for them. There will be fees. But please don't let that dissuade you. There are financial institutions that are more than happy to bring on CRBs. So let's talk a little bit about that. I thought this might be a good sort of Q&A thing with Stacy. But starting off, one of the important things to do as a financial institution is to identify a primary point of contact for cannabis businesses, because this is a special sort of account, a special kind of program, and you need to make sure that those inquiries that come in go to the people qualified to handle them. Some feedback I've heard from folks in Connecticut who are starting to apply for their licenses, as part of the application, they need a bank account. And we have heard that they've reached out to credit unions and banks, even ones that we know that are banking cannabis, and have been told, no, we're not doing it. And it's because they're calling like the frontline folks, or they're asking someone at the teller line, do you do this? And if those folks aren't informed, if they don't know where to send someone, you're losing the opportunity to make those connections. So Stacy, thinking about primary point of contact, making sure folks are aware, what are the kind of recommendations that you would have there to make sure that a financial institution is prepared to start bringing in those folks?
Well, it depends entirely on the institution and what their setup is, but having that, whether it's a designated branch employee who's comfortable and familiar talking about the offering that other employees within the branch network can refer them to. Yep, I'm glad you asked about our support of the cannabis industry. Go talk to Mary Beth. She's our cannabis banking specialist, and she's, maybe an assistant branch manager or somebody who has, you know, like I said, the ability to be comfortable talking through the additional steps necessary. In some institutions, it's actually a cannabis banking professional or a cannabis banking business development person who sort of heads up and champions the program, right? So it depends on the size of your institution, what you need, but it should be someone who other folks know about and can refer clients to.
We actually, there was a bank in Massachusetts that they established an internal referral form. So they made it available to everybody who was on phone support or actually in branch. If someone comes in and asks a question, get their information, put it in this form, and it will get routed to the person who is able to deal with those accounts. So make sure, don't just think about it as, I'm the business development person for cannabis, I'm going to go out and find folks. Folks are going to come to you, and make sure that you have some pathway by which they can actually get to the person they need to have the conversation with.
I would also add that, business accounts are challenging all on their own in terms of getting all of the beneficial owner documentation, corporate resolutions, and all of those things. Being a high risk account, you don't want your cannabis accounts to be missing any of that documentation that you need just in
Mm.
general, plus all of the due diligence documents. So you want to make sure that it's someone who is going to be thorough and make sure that that process is followed without exception.
Another thing that is becoming more and more common, and Stacy has some examples to show in a minute, is program collateral. Usually financial institutions are very discreet, they don't advertise, but it's kind of a catch-22, right? If you don't advertise, you don't get the folks that you want to have as customers. fact, there used to be kind of a trend a couple of years ago where people, as part of their account addendums, would have a cannabis business sign an NDA, which is incredibly self-defeating because you want them to have a good experience and then be a pipeline for them to bring the folks that they like to you, because they're not going to endanger their relationship with you by bringing you someone who is less than ideal. So dealing with collateral really is about how are you going to position this externally, get somewhat out of that like cone of silence, So Stacy, what are the things that you've seen that have been particularly effective?
Well, in terms of program collateral, even if you decide to be discreet about your offering, you're still going to want to have something to leave behind if you call on these businesses or go to a networking event, something that describes your interaction with the cannabis industry. So some of our clients will have those brochures sort of tucked away that they can hand out to the right people, and others, they'll create these fantastic websites that are cannabis specific and come to our page and read all about what we do or post on LinkedIn. And as Paul said, I'll show you a couple examples of that in a second. But it's also about other required documentation, right? So if you have a fee schedule, obviously you need to disclose the fees to the cannabis business, but you may not want them on your standard fee schedule. So having a separate fee schedule developed that you can put in with that program collateral so that the cannabis business knows what to expect and how the fees are charged. Funds availability might be a little bit different if you're using an armored courier and being able to disclose that separately. You might have an addendum to your account agreement or an attestation for an indirect business that you want to include. So putting all of that together in one packet and making sure that whoever is dealing with the cannabis business knows where to find all those things, whether it's online or in paper format, so that they're getting all of the things that they need up front in one packet, makes the communication much easier and you're less likely to forget things.
So I know we're running up against our time, but in terms of clarity for staff on what's public and private, what do you mean there, Stacy?
Well, if you are offering cannabis banking and you're being discreet about your offering, you want to make sure that your staff isn't going out on Facebook or LinkedIn and saying, "Hey, we're banking cannabis businesses," right? Because you may not want that. So if you have a social media policy and you want the post about cannabis banking to go through marketing or not at all, you need to highlight that, you need to communicate that, or you're going to have somebody who thinks they're helping post something that you may not want them to post.
All right.
These are the examples of the marketing collateral that we've mentioned. This was one of our institutions that just created a nice, simple brochure. And when you opened it up, it said, "We support the industry, and here's who you contact." And then we've got another client who is, they're out on LinkedIn and they're like, "Hey, we are a cannabis friendly bank. We have expertise. We know our industry. We're working with," I mean, they even indicated they're working with SunMed growers and Curio Wellness. So they're really out there telling the world that they're banking the industry. So there's a couple different approaches there. And we just wanted to show those to you as examples.
And I would just add, to go back to, if you're a cannabis business and you're trying to find ways to connect to financial institutions, go to LinkedIn. Like, LinkedIn is the one social network that's truly cannabis friendly, or at least cannabis tolerant, and definitely on the side of cannabis banking. That is the one real place where cannabis banking folks congregate. So if you're looking for a financial institution, LinkedIn is a great place to go. That CFG Bank post was a LinkedIn post. So
Yep.
I would definitely look there.
Hashtag cannabis banking.
Exactly.
All right. So one of the other things we wanted to chat about was, how do you, as a financial institution, how do you build those relationships so that you can network and bring in cannabis businesses when you're not being public, or you may want to make sure you're getting the best opportunities you can. So we highlighted a few things here for you in terms of leveraging your existing centers of influence. if you have accountants and lawyers and chamber of commerce folks that are already in your network that are also working with cannabis businesses, make sure that they know that you are a cannabis friendly institution. And that's also a place where the cannabis businesses can check as well. If you're talking to your CPA and say, "Hey, do you know of any banks that are banking the industry?" They might know of that. You can also participate in local networking events, cannabis conferences. We recently had a number of our clients participate in the NECAN conference up in Boston, and they made so many connections. Like, they were walking around the room talking to both direct and indirect businesses and made a ton of really good connections for them. You can also, if you have relationships with indirect customers, say, for example, you have a commercial real estate client who rents to the cannabis industry, or you have a lawyer that is one of your existing clients who works with the cannabis industry, make sure that they pass along the word as well. They can bring you in some referrals. And then, if you're working with Green Check, we're a partner in this world as well. So we often will connect cannabis businesses and financial institutions. Like, cannabis businesses come to us daily and say, "Hey, who do you know who's banking the industry?" And we will make introductions and send folks out. So in terms of working with cannabis businesses, from the financial institution standpoint, there's kind of those three steps. Normally, when you work with a commercial business, you're just kind of opening the account. But with cannabis businesses, you want to have that pre-conversation to understand the type of business that you're working with. Does it align with your policy? You don't want to wait till you've gone through the application process because it's arduous, right? You don't want to have them go through that process only to be declined because they aren't a type of business that you're currently supporting. So make sure you have that conversation up front. Make sure that they understand the requirements of the relationship and what your pricing is, so that it's clear to them before they go through the process that your fees will be higher and your due diligence process is going to be longer. You also want to set expectations around the process and timing. If it takes you a week to get through an approval for a cannabis business, you want to let the customer know that this isn't like a typical commercial account where you're just going to sit down and open it up, that there is an approval process. The second part of the process is that initial due diligence, making sure that you're collecting all of that required documentation. And then you have a process that you need to go through to confirm the state licensing information, look at those financials, go through the beneficial ownership, make sure that you are deciding whether or not you're going to accept that legacy cash, and you're collecting whatever information you need for that ahead of time. And then once you've gone through those steps and you've gone through that due diligence and those conversations, then you're ready to open the account, like you would any other commercial account where you're funding and setting up those additional services.
So again, I would flip this back. If you're on the cannabis side, these are the kind of things that you need to be prepared for and understand are going to happen. It's going to be a process with many steps. And you're going to want to make sure that when you go in, you let them know what kind of business you are, what kind of sales you're going to have. Let them know, you have all the documentation, you have all the stuff that you provided with the state. It's ready to go. Be ready to hand that over. Be ready to be absolutely transparent about your business. Have a conversation about, do you have cash on hand right now? And what will you need to do to be able to demonstrate that that's something that can be deposited? And, it does take time, and there is a certain amount of patience that's involved.